You're listening to Clifford Kelly on Straight Truth Radio, the podcast.
Grace and peace be unto you from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. This is the Straight Truth Radio podcast, the place where the lip of truth endures forever. Thank you for tuning in and being with us this evening, here where we're just trying to bring understanding to end time events. I'm your host, Cliff Kelly, and again, want to thank you for tuning in. And just before we kind of get started with this show, again, we are dealing with race, justice, and kingdom living with our guest, Jason L. Carter, Esquire, and we will bring him in just a second. But just before we do that, just wanted to share with you ways that you can contact us. You can hit us up, email, and we've had some comments come in. We want to thank you thank you in advance for what you will send. Thank you for what we have been getting in the past, but at straighttruthradio@yahoo.com, that's straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. Also, some of you who are actually watching us on the Facebook page, but then you can also look out for us on Straight Truth Radio, on our Straight Truth Radio page. If you have any comments, just hit us up on the Facebook page, the Cliff Kelly page. I think we have somebody monitoring that who will bring the questions to us. We had some comments last week, and Jason wanted to try and address that from last week. But also, you can check us out on Truth Truth R1 or at CK Holy Man. Also on Periscope at Straight Truth Radio, and also on Facebook, Straight Truth Radio Podcast. If you are listening to the audio format, please check out our podcast on the audio platform. We are currently on Anchor, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Again, we are here with our guest, Jason Carter. And without further ado, I want to bring Jason in. Where are we at? Here we are. Jason, brother Jason, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing well, brother. Thanks for having me back.
All right. And so, as we were talking last week and then during this week, I think it was I said we wanted to move from the race, the portion of the race conversation into justice, but there were one or two things that I still wanted to touch on first. We had never really got into, and one of the things I'm trying to do, you and I, we kind of passionately go back and forth and everything, but I tried to leave the floor open for you to actually make your comment, because if we're going back and forth, we're never gonna get done. We'll never get done. So,
yeah.
But there were some people who shouted back to me and said, "Hey, he looked like he got you last week. I was like, "Hey, that's family, man. Come on now. I mean, that's my family." But at any rate, really, again, the format is really just to have a conversation, because at the end of the day, the one thing that I always say to Maya used to always ask me, why do you even bother to go back and forth with, this person, that person, whatever. They gonna believe what they believe, you're gonna believe what you believe, and then, you actually look like a Trump apologist. And it's really not that, but I know how it comes out. So, but the point is that it's not the point is not for me to change your mind, because I'm not going to do it. And then, you're not going to change my mind. But those, A and B going back and forth, that's not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen there. But person C, D, E, F, at least they hear both sides and they can make their determination from there. Because sometimes there are things that they are not hearing, they don't know, they didn't look at it like that, whatever. So that's the one part of it. And then, look, I just like the conversation. And for 4 years of just hearing a whole bunch of this, and then you get in your car and speed off, and you didn't even get the rebuttal. I mean, you shot the dude and just left him there. You left me there bleeding. I mean, back me up. So I just enjoy the conversation. But getting back to some of the comments from last week. Well, no, I'm sorry. The one thing I wanted to address first is there were a couple of months ago, and we're still somewhat on the race platform. There was a video a couple of months ago, and I'm sure you maybe had a chance to watch it, and it was hot for that 15 minutes or whatever, but then after that, it kind of fills it out like all things do. Pastor Ron Parsley made his apology in regards to the racial environment that we're in right now, and also he made the comment. As much as I agree with him and saying that let's not be divided now, whatever. However, I kind of felt like it fell on. It was kind of mute. It fell on deaf ears. Did you have a chance to listen to that? And what did you think about that?
So I did. I think I focused more, and I may have not caught all of the apology. I focused more on him apologizing for making the statement that the founding fathers freed all their slaves. I don't know if I dug much deeper into the apology other than that. And so I'm happy. I'm actually, while you were talking, pulled it up in the background here because I got the feeling that I didn't get the full context of what he said. But if ultimately he was engaging in, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, in the apology of the role that the evangelical or white church has played in the perpetuation of racism and the creation of slavery and kind of the impact that it has today, I think that's admirable for someone to do that. I've never really been a fan of a collective apology today for actions that happened a long time ago. I typically try to focus more on collective action today for things that we still see impacting people's lives today. The apology for someone else's actions is nice, right? It's a nice ceremonial gesture. But my question is, if you see racism in your church, if you see it in your family, if you see it in the streets, if you see it in politics, if you see it in the powers that control our everyday lives, are you willing to address that? And so that would be more important to me than a historical apology for historical wrongs. But I will concede that I did not focus on the entirety of it. So I will yield the floor for you to educate me on what else he talked about.
Well, I think the first apology, you were right on that he addressed. That was the first apology, but I think he came, and that was about maybe somewhere under 10 minutes long, and I think he had titled that, "Silent No More," and he spoke out on to my Black brothers and sisters, Hispanic brothers and sisters, to everyone, even my white brothers and sisters. Let's stop being divided, yada yada yada, whatever. But then I think after that, there was so much. I'll just say. I started to say there was so much stink behind that, but it was just so much uproar behind it. And really, honestly, it was the uproar comes from the brothers and sisters of a darker hue. You understand what I'm saying? Who felt like that was a very disingenuous. They felt like it was a disingenuous comment or apology. So it caused him to double back, and there was a shorter apology where he said, "Listen, let me unequivocally say, racism back then, or slavery was, and it is wrong. Racism is wrong, whatever." And I agree with you. I appreciate the attempt to try and say something. And I don't know how you feel about it. I think that, I don't know if we said anything about this last week or not, but with this George Floyd incident, and I kept praying and asking, how is it that George Floyd was the catalyst that made the world go crazy? How, you know what I'm saying? Because there were murders before, or there were deaths before, whether you want to call it justified, whether you want to call it murder, whatever. There were deaths before. But how is that George Floyd became the trigger that set the world on fire? Because it was across the country. It's not just
across the world.
Across the world, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know how you feel about it, but you want to take a shot at what do you think?
I can talk about that. Yeah. So the George Floyd murder, and that's what I would call it, was interesting because for individuals who were previously murdered by police, someone was always able to discredit them in some way, and you've even seen a little bit of that with George Floyd. Right, so you have Ahmaud Arbery, and immediately when Ahmaud Arbery is murdered, and this was not by police officers, but people acting under the color of law, under the authority they felt like they had in the state to facilitate an arrest. The argument was he went into abandoned property. In fact, one person, Candace Owens, even said that he burglarized the property, which unfortunately, Candace, that's not the definition of burglary. But he went into abandoned property, and so they were able to discredit the individual, and so public opinion was able to be swayed. You see Tamir Rice. What discredited Tamir Rice was that he was playing with something that looked like a gun, and he was a very large male. Right? You see these abilities to show people, or at least to attempt to show that the person did not have clean hands. You even see it a little bit in George Floyd because they talk about the fact that he had fentanyl in his system at the time of the murder. But when this happened on and it was recorded and the information was available, there was not really an ability to discredit this guy. There was no defense you could raise for the police officer who knelt on his neck. It was savage. And it wasn't like there was no confusion. There wasn't an issue where they thought maybe he had a gun or maybe he was doing something to further to precipitate the situation. It was just an officer with his knee in the neck of a man until he died. You couple that with a pandemic where people are losing their jobs, where people are wondering what the government is doing, where sentiment isn't very high on the response that the United States has had to the COVID crisis, and people were upset. And more so, I think the cynic in me says people also had a lot of time on their hands. And so when you have all of that plus star power, because his best friend is a former NBA player, so you have all of that. You have immediate star power. You have immediate attention on the issue. It was the perfect storm, and I think that people are tired of trying to find a reason not to care about what they're seeing.
Okay. I also now my take is a little different and a little deeper, and I'm always accused for trying to be deep all the time, but I take the approach that I feel like we are absent. I know that we are absent justice. And I know that God is a God who loves justice. However, I honestly believe that God has a system in a way that that it is supposed to come about. So when I look at, so when I search the scriptures and I've been, praying and I've been asking us, Lord, what's going on, whatever, even in regards to the George Floyd death. And I would also call it a murder. There's no justification for it whatsoever. You brought up, it's funny you would bring up Candace Owens, because I'm not a fan of hers either. I think there's only maybe one or two comments that she's ever made that I agree with, and I don't even remember what they were right now. I nodded at the time when I heard them, but I I don't even remember now. But when
her book is a bestseller, so kudos to her.
Oh yeah, okay. I'm glad for whatever I'm glad for you. However, I think that there's a scripture, and I believe it's in Genesis. And see, it's escaping me the actual chapter and verse now, where the Lord is talking to Abraham. He's courting Abraham, and he's saying to him, I think it's either 12, 13, or chapter 15. It might be chapter 15, I think. But he's saying to him that his descendants will be servants in the land that is not theirs for 400 years. And then after that period, they'll be released. But then those people whom they have served, he will bring judgment on them. Now, obviously, when you look at that verse traditionally, historically, whatever, it's equated to the Jews and their time spent in Egypt for those 400 years. However, and so I'm like, well, Lord, okay, fine, that's fine. But then I also began to I kept looking at it, and I said, but Lord, this is something else here. Why do I feel so stirred up on this? When I began to kind of really look and do the history on it, when we look at now George Floyd, that happened late last year, correct? Late last year?
Late this year. It happened in 2020.
Early this year.
Well, yeah, so like I think March of this year. I can find the date for you.
Because the point is that in August of 1619, was documented the very first slave hit this continent in Virginia.
Yeah.
400 years from there would have been August 20th to be exact, of 2019.
Okay.
So it would appear that there should be some type of freedom release from that period of bondage that we watch this. When you add slavery, and you add all the things that we have suffered throughout the years, redlining,
Jim Crow. Yeah.
Jim Crow, yes.
Lynching,
profiling,
de facto segregation, de jure segregation.
All of it.
Yeah.
All of that it adds up. I mean, when you add all that we suffered throughout those periods and decades and years and everything, the 400-year marker is August 20th, 2019. But something else happened in there. I don't know if that was what was the Castro gentleman. There was another death in there, and then just before, and you said February, March of
Floyd was May 25th, 2020
of this year.
Yeah.
Okay, so at some point there's a breaking point. There is, and I agree that there is some breaking point. For 400 years, we have not seen, justice or equalness in the country that our ancestors have helped build or built, you know.
Right.
And so I do agree that there is some point where you get tired, but I also have a problem with the way that we are trying to find justice. Okay. Um, what does First of all, let me ask you a question. What does justice look like to you?
I want to answer that, but I want to circle back to just hit one point that I feel like is important.
All
And
right.
I think that people who believe that they know my politics might not love this statement. But I would say that for me politically, I voted Republican and Democrat. And in many ways, I identify with a lot of things the Republican Party stands for and find myself to be quite conservative. But there are a lot of things I agree with the Democratic Party stance on and find myself to be very socially liberal. Right. So I try to find the person who I think is gonna balance those interests. But the other reason why I think we had a powder keg that occurred this year was because of the president. And I think that's a good and a bad thing. I told someone recently that I feel like, regardless of what you feel about Trump, Trump was good for America, but not for the reason many people would believe. For me, Trump was good for America because he exposed the thing that we've always tried to hide, and that is that there is this very erudite and wealthy segment of our society that they wield a lot of power, and they don't have a high regard for those that don't look like them, talk like them, or have the wealth that they have. And I think Trump represents that. And I think the Democratic Party has known that the Republican Party hasn't represented that, and they've taken advantage of those who look like that. They've taken advantage of Black and brown people to get the vote, and they've placated Black and brown people throughout the years. And so what you had was a powder keg. You had people who were very incensed about a social justice situation, but there was no one in office to placate them, no one in office to get them to feel like the king had it all under control. And the person that was in office could have cared less. And I think because of that, because there was no one there to put a salve on the wound, to make people feel better and to go back to business as usual, but someone there who expressed the true sentiment, I believe, cynically, of what America really feels about its Black and brown population. I think that too led to the powder keg. But to the issue of justice, I just give a little background. I served as a prosecutor. I'm an attorney. I was a defense attorney as well. And I would first say that justice can be very hard to find, especially when we think about laws that were made by men. Laws that were made by men are inherently fallible and inherently subjective. And so for me, real justice comes when I take a certain set of facts and I weigh them against what God says. And that's hard because biblical truths can influence politics and can influence laws, but they are not the same in many cases. And so when I see that people are not, I guess to say it very simply, as we see it in America, when we have similarly situated people being treated differently, to me, that's an injustice. When we no longer regard human life as sacred, no matter where we find that human life, I think that's an injustice. And I think that speaks not only to a conversation about abortion, but I think it speaks to a conversation about social welfare. I would say now, I would just drop this nugget and take my seat, if you will. That I think the vast majority of people who believe that they are pro-life are actually pro-birth, and that very few people really are concerned about the body once it leaves the womb. And I think that is something that still matters and should still matter. And I think injustice lies in our inability to care for or to find a way to provide for those who are born into situations that are disadvantageous. I think that's where, to me, justice lies. I think lastly, I would say in our justice system, we know that the system of inequality that we've established as our criminal justice system doesn't work. We've incentivized people to capitalize on Black bodies and on brown bodies. There are rules on the books presently where privatized prisons get paid if we do not keep the beds full. They actually can go to the states and go to the federal government and get money from the government. So now we're incentivizing the government to enforce laws in such a way that the government doesn't have to pay. We're putting a price tag on a body, and there's no justice in that. And we know that. And yet we do nothing about it, Democrat or Republican. And we can talk about what Obama did during his presidency and how I liked but didn't like it. And we can talk about what Trump did during his presidency. And I like to call Trump the king of half measures, and how he engaged in a half measure. But I think that's where justice is. And I would just say, we as Christians, our job is to find a way to align that as much as possible with the will of God.
Okay. So, and my heart bleeds because I'm thinking about the Breonna Taylor case. Okay. And, what do you say and what do you do about that? You have someone breaking into your house, your home. You defend yourself, or the gentleman who was there defends the home. And if you're asleep or sleep or whatever, you're in the back room, you may or may not heard somebody announce themselves when they broke in, whatever. So you're sticking with that testimony. But then there are several people who also agree with that testimony that there was no announcement identifying themselves, versus the testimony of the officers who obviously are going to say that they did identify themselves, with only one witness saying that, yeah, they identified themselves. So, I mean, how do you I'm stuck, man. I'm stuck.
This answer is gonna get me in trouble. So in so many ways, but I'll give it because I think it's the appropriate answer. I think the first thing that we identify in that is that we have, again, a system that incentivizes people to go out and commit these heinous acts on behalf of the state. Right? We are sending people where they're trying to get to her boyfriend. Right? So what they do is they break in.
Hold on. Let's pause for it. Trying to get to her boyfriend.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But the guy that they got, that wasn't the guy, was it?
Well, he was later charged. I think.
But what I'm saying is that unless I don't understand this fully, and I don't think that I really do, the guy that shot them, that's not the guy they were looking for, was it?
I believe it is. Don't quote me on that. I'm actually looking at an article here while we're talking, but I believe that that's who they were looking for. Because
I thought it was another guy. It was another guy who she used to holler at some time ago, whatever. But he still had, in some way, shape, or form, he still had ties to her. Maybe a bank account or something like that. I don't know. But
I'll take a pause and say,
that was the guy.
Kind of regardless of that, the idea that this is commonplace, that officers can put on riot gear and put on SWAT gear and break into doors to find individuals in order to arrest them, with the idea, and this is the concept, that if any shot is fired against the officer, they get to murder everybody. That's the problem with the Breonna Taylor situation for me. Yeah. One shot. Officer was shot one time. They did not retreat. They did not back away. They didn't do anything in order to actually protect their lives, which is what they would have done. Instead, their response, as they believe they've been trained to do, is now we get to shoot indiscriminately into this apartment complex.
Well, okay. Well, the language is because I also do security, have done security, is that you're trained to neutralize the threat. Mm-hmm. However, who you neutralized wasn't even the threat. They didn't even have a weapon.
But neutralizing the threat is not the indiscriminate shooting of firearms into an apartment complex, right? You have a guy outside, he doesn't care who he's shooting. He doesn't know who's a threat. He's just shooting into the apartment complex because one shot was fired. Not much different than what happened here in Cleveland. When the car backfired in Cleveland, Ohio, and officers jump on the vehicle and fire round upon round into the vehicle under the auspices that they're neutralizing a threat, you're no longer neutralizing a threat. right?
Okay,
You are.
and I think we got a comment. Someone said that they were seeking her ex. So I guess that part I did have right. It wasn't
That
even the
makes
guy
it even
that was
worse.
exactly. It wasn't even that guy. It was yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in 1,000 different ways, they could have actually executed that
Thank
job.
you, Bishop Pope. Bishop Pope. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bishop Pope. But the reality is that's not justice. And the reality of the fact that the Attorney General there would seek to find a way to justify that. Right? I find the cynical comments very telling. That the only person that was cited in that entire situation with the criminal offense, they were cited for shooting drywall. Drywall is more important than the loss of human life.
Right. Yeah.
But these are themes that people that are commonplace, and yet when we call when there's a call, and I hate the language, the verbiage of it, but I think that there are concepts within it that I think are very true. When there's a call to say, look, defund the police, hate the verbiage. When I call the police, I want them to come. I want to be really clear. But the essence of it is let's rethink policing. Right now, what we're doing is we're militarizing poorly trained people, and the reality is that they are poorly trained. We train our officers in America less than any other industrialized nation, and we ask barbers to take more hours of training than police officers. Just throw that out there. But we take our poorly trained individuals, and we want them to be a militarized force in communities to keep communities at bay. When we know that poverty is impacting issues in the community. We know that education's impacting issues in the community. We know that there are these other factors that we can try to address to minimize criminality. We ignore that and we continue to fund the police force. And this is happening not only at a local level. There's the Kerner report that happened at the presidential level, where the report was commissioned to determine what's happening in the Black community. And the results of the report were that the Black community need better schools, better healthcare, and they need jobs. And I forget the president at the time, and it may come to me, he just tabled it. And then the next bill he passed was to increase policing.
Hold on, time out. Say that again, because there was a glitch. Say that again. Who tabled it?
The president at the time. I forget his name right now, but I'll tell you exactly who it was. And he tabled it and then increased funding for policing. Lyndon B. Johnson.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I just say it's not that we don't know.
The same guy who locked up the vote for the next 200 years, the Negro vote, but that was and that's being nice for the next 200 years.
I told you, like I told you last podcast, I'm not here to suggest that people aren't racist. I'm not here to suggest that we haven't had a history of racist presidents that have run the gambit.
By the way, just out of curiosity, what party was that? I'm just asking. The
same party that passed the voting rights bill. So keep that in mind. But
okay,
the Democrats.
Okay. The same party that wrote the crime bill. Anyway, let's move on.
Absolutely. That was approved with bipartisan. We could talk about the vote. We could talk about that a lot, right? No one at the time of the passage of that bill thought it was bad. Right? Very few people.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Democratic the Democratic Black Caucus.
Right. No one thought it was bad because they didn't care who it was going to affect because they knew who it was going to affect.
I say to some degree. I think I agree with that. I agree that there's a cynicism, right? There within the Black community as well as the white community, there's this idea of kind of what happens in the underprivileged community is what happens in the underprivileged community, right? I think you see that. I think you see that when you see Blacks migrating to the north and white and Blacks leaving the city and leaving the suburbs because they don't like the fact that there's an increase in crime or there's an increase in a culture that they don't really like. This isn't a problem that I just label on one party or another. Racism is something that is systemic and impacts all of us. And so at the time, there was a bill passed because we believed that the problem in the urban community was Black people. That was that there was something pathologically wrong with Black people, which caused them to be criminal. And what we absolutely should have known then, and what we absolutely know today, is there's nothing pathologically wrong with Black people. Poor people commit crimes. People with bad educations commit crimes. This isn't like magical information. Fix those issues, you fix crime. But we don't want to spend the money on that. We don't want to deal with those issues. And so for me, the crime bill, in its passage, an attempt to address crime, maybe not the best idea, probably inherently bad. You can say all the negative things you say about it, but the application of it was worse than the bill itself. Because of that, you had targeted policing in Black communities. If the bill was universally applied, we wouldn't see the disparities that we have, because we know that drug use is equal amongst the races. But instead, it was targeted at the Black community. So not only do you have a bill that's bad, but the way it's applied to the communities was also bad. And that was Democrats and Republicans alike, right? It's not just the Democrats that are vilifying Black bodies and talking about welfare moms and talking about the evils in the Black community. Everybody does it so that they can get votes, right? The last thing I would say is one of the things that terrifies me the most about Donald Trump is he sounds just like Nixon, right? He's reading from the Nixon Bible. I am the law and order president.
Mm. And what's wrong with that exactly? And reason why I ask, if someone breaks into your house, if someone steals your car, who are you calling?
I just told you I'm calling the police, but that's not what they're signaling. No, what they're signaling is the same thing that Trump signals when he says, "Hey, suburbs, be afraid. Biden's going to put low-income housing in your community." It's the same dog whistle. It's be afraid of Black people. And that dog whistle, and basing laws on that and policing on that and having the control of the police powers of the state based on that methodology, that mentality, that's scary for me. And that's one of the most terrifying things. And you can hear it in his rhetoric. You can hear it in how he chooses what he addresses. But I don't liberate a lot of people from that. We have a problem in America, and it's that we think that there's something pathologically wrong with Black people, and we need to fix that.
Okay, we had a question came in, and the question is, how did Blacks become poor people?
How did they become poor people?
How did Blacks become the poor people?
Sorry, I'm sorry. So there's a cynic in me, and I have to beat him up sometimes.
Listen. Okay, listen. The first thing comes to my mind when I hear that comment is, I'm not trying to get beyond the political fighting and debating, whatever, but I can't help it. It's the thought that comes to mind. It's when Biden says that poor people are just as smart as white kids. Poor kids are just as smart as white kids. Now, I'm not sure if that's exactly where you were going with that question. Please, it really wasn't defined, the question there, but automatically when you say poor people or poor kids, you automatically think Black. Why is that?
So if I would say that I would answer the two different questions. So first, I would just want to answer what I hope they were asking, which is systemically, how did this happen? And systemically, we know that when during Reconstruction, Blacks were held out of jobs and held out of the opportunities that America began to provide at that time, because there was racism and it was pervasive. And as they began, when they were offered 40 acres and a mule, then it was taken away from them by the next president, right? So these people were
who vetoed that? Who took that away?
It was the successor to Lincoln who did it.
And that was who? And what party was that?
It doesn't matter. You can get all excited about this Democratic Republican conversation.
I know, man. I'm just saying.
Neither of them have been good for Black people.
I should be flogged. I should be flogged. I know.
I'll even say this. Who passed the New Deal?
Who passed the New Deal?
Who passed the New Deal?
there's a New Deal. You talking about
The New
green?
Deal.
You talking about the
No,
Green New
not the
Deal?
Green New Deal. No, the New Deal that got us out of the depression of the 20s. Who passed it?
Okay, all right. Touche.
So moving right along. So so then what you began to see were black codes, and I could just fast forward to Jim Crow. At that same time, during the time of Jim Crow, when America really got their head around how to build wealth, how to multiply wealth with property, blacks were held out of that. Blacks were forced to live in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas because of redlining. At the exact same time that the federal government was subsidizing project housing for whites while they were building the suburbs and writing into the deeds of the properties in the suburbs that you could not allow blacks to live there. While the FHA would only insure property that had deed restrictions where you could not allow blacks to live there. So while wealth is being multiplied in the suburbs, blacks are held out of that. So I say that, and I say that we still see the impact of that today. And then you just jump into mass incarceration. You see the separation of fathers from the home. I could go on and on. But no one. I would say this, that I am not trying to describe all black people as poor. Not my story at all. Right. I am trying to say that socioeconomically disadvantaged people in America tend to be black and brown people statistically, and their ability to move from generational poverty to wealth, their ability to break the wealth, the poverty gap, the poverty stronghold is like 15 times harder than it is if you're white. Just the only factor holding constant is the color of their skin, and it's 15 times harder to break generational poverty if you're black than if you're white. So I'm not saying all black people are poor. I'm just saying, as I see it, it's much harder for black people to get access, and has been much harder for black people to get access to the wealth building model that the American government has created economically than it has for whites.
So then would you agree with the, maybe you just said it, but would you agree with the concept that it is systematic?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's hard to suggest it's not systemic. And most people would say it's not systemic because it's no longer written into the law. And in fact, the Supreme Court attempted to abolish this concept by ruling that if a law is not racist on its face, if it doesn't discriminate on its face, then you can't determine that the law is discriminatory. And I say I don't know how an intelligent person could look at the 1 to 100 ratio that existed until Obama changed the law between cocaine and crack and not see racism in that. I don't know how you can look at that and say that's racially neutral. I don't know how you can look at the stat that tells you that drug use is the same amongst all races, yet black people are being arrested and prosecuted for it at a higher rate than anyone else, and not see that the way that the laws are being administered is racist, and that there's a system. The system is clear. You can look just here in Strongsville, and you can look just here in Middleburg, and you'll see row housing that was built and given free to veterans, white veterans, for them to live in and for them to build wealth. And so that when as the property increased in value, they were able to take loans against that and build wealth on that and pay for schooling for their kids and buy other houses. That wealth was given to white people, especially those who were veterans and returning from the war, and blacks were excluded from that. If that's not systemic, I don't know what is.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of skip forward, not because because we ran out of what to talk about, but I want to get more into the
I would say don't forget we had that question we got to tackle.
Well, okay, you want to hit that now then? I think, and some of the question from last week.
Question from last week.
Or the comment or question from last week. So let's go there first, and then I'll wrap up with I want you to think about it for a second. What do you feel is the solution to this race issue, the absence of justice? Kind of contemplate that while you are commenting on last week's comment or question, and then I'll give you my take on it, and then maybe we'll shut it down for this evening. And we'll review notes and see if we need to continue to dig deeper.
Indeed, indeed,
ahead.
amen, amen.
All right.
All right.
Go
So the
ahead.
question last week from someone was, I can only assume that they wrote this when I was talking about socialism and my take on how the church has an obligation to give, and how we have an obligation to help those that are less fortunate. And the comment, and I will read at least the first part of it verbatim. It says, "That's just not true. No one is against helping those who honestly need it. It's those who abuse the system or are generationally welfare recipients." Then they provide 2 Thessalonians 3:7-10. I'll read that as well. It says, "For you yourselves know how you ought to our example. We were not idle when we were with you, nor did we eat anyone's food without paying for it. On the contrary, we worked night and day, laboring and toiling so that we would not be a burden to any of you. We did this not because we do not have the right to such help, but in order to offer ourselves as a model for you to imitate. For even when we were with you, we gave you this rule, that one who is unwilling to work shall not eat." And so that was the quote. And I find it a common quote, and I'll try to hit this quickly for the sake of time. I find it a common quote. I find it a common rebuttal when people are talking about the obligation to give and to help those that are less fortunate. People typically will jump into the conversation of those who don't work, don't eat. I find that strange for a couple reasons. I find it interesting because to me, it's like the response, the rebuttal of all lives matter, right? Someone will say Black Lives Matter, and the response is all lives matter. And the attempt there is to neutralize the conversation people are trying to have about the unlawful killing of Black lives. And then in many cases, those exact same people will turn around and say Blue Lives Matter. But then they'll say that the Black Lives Matter movement is identity politics. For me, if you're willing to believe that a uniform that someone wears 40 plus hours a week has value in our society and should matter, then clearly you believe that the skin someone wears the entirety of their lives has value in our society and should not be neutralized with the conversation of all lives matter before you take a moment to figure out what their real problem is and figure out what they're really saying. So I find this neutralizing argument happening, and I find that that's what I feel like this was. I just bring up a couple things. First is the statement that no one's against helping people. I think that's just not true, right? We know that sin is in this world. We know that people don't want to help people. Those people absolutely exist. And so to suggest that no one's against it, to me, is an error. The second thing I would say is, who gets to determine who honestly needs it? I just get reminded of Luke 7, where Jesus tells us, give every time somebody begs of you. And if they want you to walk a block, you walk two. If they take your cloak, give them the shirt. So I don't know at what point we've determined exactly where that line is in terms of helps. I then jump into the conversation of generational poverty. And I would just argue for this individual just to look at the statistics that have been released by the US Census on that. The vast majority of people, are on welfare for less than 4 years. But I think that begs a completely different question, which is the very last thing in this verse says, to those who are unwilling to work. And often what we do is we conflate the poor with those who are not willing to work. And I think we absolutely know that's not true. We know that there are people throughout the world and also in the United States who work harder than most of us, but they don't get the same reward for their labor. So the idea that people who are poor don't want to work is crazy, right? We can't start the conversation.
I think that there should just be a better definition of what poor is, because I gave you the example last week. Like, if for whatever reason it was, if I had the minimum wage job, my wife had the minimum wage job, but we got 2 or 3 babies and we're not making it, and then we go to apply for some type of government assistance, the fact that we're married, we're not getting that help. But if she goes alone with the same 2 or 3 babies, she has all the help that she needs. But she now becomes married to the government. As long as there is no marriage certificate or she does not disclose that she is married to someone, she can get all the help that she needs. And so I think that there has to be a better definition of what poor is.
Well,
Go ahead.
but I've heard this argument, and married people can get welfare. So I think that the idea that welfare destroys families isn't true, because married people can get it. In fact, statistically, there are lots of married people that are on it. I think the definition that we have to change is what's welfare. And I'll dive back into my conversation, but we traditionally think of welfare in terms of food stamps or in terms of Section 8. But all welfare is government assisted living. And so if your child is in a state funded school, they're in school on welfare. And we can, this list can go on and on of state funded benefits that people get that they somehow don't think. So if your kid, if you went to a public school and you went to a public college and your kids at a public college, then you guys are generational welfare recipients. So these terms that have been politically thrown out to us as a means of trying to not give, to me, are problematic. I never saw Jesus trying to find a way not to give. And so my problem with this verse is to use this as a reason not to give, to me, is antithetical to the gospel. The other thing I raise is if the verse says, which is what it says, is if you don't work, you don't eat, then let's make what that verse says in reverse true. If you do work, you do eat. And we know for a fact that there are working poor. There are people who can't afford to eat, plus pay their bills, plus live in society, because we have economies of scale. We're capitalists. We believe that if we value something to be great, we're going to pay more for it. And if we don't value something else to be great, we're going to pay less for it. And because we're capitalists, it means that there are people who are going to work very hard in a trade or in an area of society, and they're just not going to have enough to make it. And so what is wrong with trying to find a way to help them eat? The last thing I would say, and I'm done for the sake of time, is I think you have to contextualize this too. These are evangelists coming into a situation and saying, they didn't say that to take from the local church was bad. They actually said, I have a right to. But they said instead,
you have a right to take from the church.
It's right there. They said we did not take from you, but we had a right to. We had a right for you to pay us, to compensate us for what we were bringing to you. It's in the verse. I didn't make it up. It's right there.
Okay. All right. Okay. I'm just trying to. I'm not debating that it's in there. I'm just trying to understand your application.
Well, I'll go there. So what I think the verse is really saying is the example we're trying to set is if you have the ability not to depend on others, then go and work, go and do your thing and be a benefit to them, right? Because what you're doing in that is you're actually blessing them by not using their resources to support you, even though you have a right to it. This is different from what we should do when we find people in a less fortunate circumstance. I think it's a fallacy to conflate the two. Jesus covers well, with unequivocally, what we do when we find the less fortunate. This verse is not what we do when we find the less fortunate. This verse is what we do when we find ourselves fortunate and how we don't take advantage of others. Different.
Okay. All right. So I'm not sure if we touched it or not, but I want to say this. I think as you and I both being ministers, saved, but I want to, when I look at our dilemma, the race issue, when I look at the failure of justice, and I look at the whole environment that we're in, okay, I can't help but to come back to, because it's been in my spirit tough for, I mean, at least since 2015. I've been on it. Second Chronicles 7:14. Okay, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven. But we 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 say that, we've preached it, we've done all of that, and we are no more in a place where the recipe for that needs to be applied than we are right now.
Amen.
Because beyond a shadow of a doubt, no one can argue. Well, people try, but I don't see how you can argue that we are, whether we're in the last days, we're in the end times or not. When Jesus says in Matthew 24, he says, nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. I can park it just on nation shall rise against nation, okay? Because there is your racism right there. When a nation of, let's just say, white people will not understand why Colin Kaepernick kneels, and now you got all these when we have a and listen, and by all means, you know my heart, you know my spirit, I'm not dogging white people, I'm not, my white brothers and sisters, that, but I believe, I honestly believe that we have all, and we kind of said this, we touched on it before we came on live, that I believe in some way, shape, or form, we've all fell for the banana in the tailpipe, where we're picking sides as far as whether it's vote blue or, vote red, the D or the R, the left or the right, the Democrat, the Republican. And I believe it's so much deeper than that. How we were talking about, it's beyond Trump and Biden. It's beyond all of that. We're saying how, we are thinking of the way to kind of feel or on how to heal the land, but we've been given a recipe on how the land will be healed.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's great. This is one of my biggest points I try to make now in the realm of all the debates. If it's the abortion debate, if it's the racism debate, whatever the debates are, I think we're right back where the people of Israel were when Jesus came. And that is that we are allowing our institutions to drive our decision making. Mm-hmm. More so, we're right back where the people of Israel were when they had the judges and they told God they wanted a king. We're at a point where we think that it's the king's job to fix our society. I don't think that that's true, and I don't rely on the king for that. Now, let me say this: there are institutions created by the king, right? The economy we live in, the social structure, political structure. These are things I feel like I have to have a say in as a Christian. But when it comes to issues of individual morality and the influence that we should have as a church, I think we've abdicated that. I think that we've gotten really comfortable with our nice houses and our nice cars, and that America is a wealth building society. And we think prosperity, I think I may have said this last podcast or in one of our many conversations, we think prosperity equals right. And I think that what we need to understand is we can prosper, nations will prosper, people will prosper, regardless of whether they're fulfilling the aims of God. So all I would say is I think the church has fallen asleep at the wheel. And the church, mm-hmm. we're building temples, and we're having all of these fancy things, and we have all these great tech things, and we're programming, and we've fallen asleep at the wheel. We fall asleep at just influencing people by the love of Christ, to love others with the love of Christ. And I think that's what our society is lacking. Not a new king, mm-hmm. but men and women who are called by the name of God to go out and do God's work, and who actually want to do it in God's name. And lastly, I would say, We have a nation that has that has that has only engaged in half measures of Christianity in the name of Christ since its inception. We need to identify that, and we need to, as a body, do something about that. And that's where I think we fall short. You know, whether this new Supreme Court justice, and I know my time is gone, I'll just say this: whether the new Supreme Court justice,
you know what? I customarily try and keep it at an hour, but I know sometimes, depending on the subject matter, we're going to bleed over a little bit. I want to, first of all, I want to thank you for your time. You've been very, gracious with that. And so, if maybe let's finish a couple of thoughts. I don't want to, go too long because I want to be generous with your time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would just say this then. I would say,
thought.
Amy Barrett, if Amy Barrett is seated or not, if they pack the court or not, abortions happened before Roe v. Wade.
Mm-hmm.
If your issue is to stop abortions, then really the reality is the heart of the person is your aim. It's not the legality of the act. So church, get back into the business of the church. Get back into changing lives, right? Get back into addressing the hypocrisies that our kids see in us as they see us stepping over poor people, but then going to church talking about how much we need to be a blessing to our community, right? But they more is caught than taught. Get back into the business of doing what God called us to do, and we'll see society change if my people, which are called by my name, would humble themselves, seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, and pray, right?
Right.
All we want to do is just pray. We miss all that earlier stuff.
Right. And I keep saying it. There's 4 ingredients to this cake, and unless you have all 4 of them, and the verse is conditional. If my people apply the 4 ingredients, then he says, then I'll heal the land. But then watch it. He doesn't stop there. I didn't even say it, but we stop at verse 14. Verse 15 says, now my eyes shall be open and my ears attentive unto your prayer that is made in this place. So it gives the implication that you're doing all the stuff that you're doing, and I'm not even hearing you.
Not even hearing you.
Not even hearing you. Because if we hide iniquity in our hearts, then what? He doesn't hear it. Yeah. So I think it's absolutely right. When we know to do right and don't do it, then it absolutely is sin to us.
Absolutely. I often think of the Tower of Babel.
Okay.
And how it feels like what we're doing now. Right. The Tower of Babel was this monument to ourselves. Right. Or even when David decided to brag about everything that he had. And I think we're right there in the vein of that. We're right there in the vein of we're just building these monuments to ourselves. And what did God do? The more we did that, the more confusion he allowed to be amongst the nations and amongst the people. And the more confusion will exist as long as what we're worshiping in this time is us and not him.
And you said something so key, and I think we can wrap it up and shut it down now, but you said something so key in just that statement that, and how God just, because you look at where we are now and how we've hidden behind the 4 walls of our church and just our ministry and everything, and we built dynasties unto ourselves and everything, and we haven't gone out to make disciples. We wait for them to come in, but 9 times out of 10, they're not coming in. It's just you 4 no more. That's it. And that's the way it's always been, for the most part. The one who wins souls is wise. And so, I see the Hebrews 12:27 principle being applied here. How he's shaking everything that could be shaken until there's nothing left that couldn't be shaken, which is the word of God. The word can't be shaken.
Yeah.
Everything will pass away, but the word of God. And so,
I would just say,
go
sorry,
ahead.
just this last thing I would just say is,
Mhm.
and this is probably going to be the most problematic thing I would say, is
Uh-oh.
it is. I would ask it as a question:
Okay.
have we made an idol out of nationalism? Right? Are we worshiping the place and not the creator? Right? It's like people who worship the presence but not his presence. I think as Americans, we believe that because God was written into the language of the Constitution, that everything that happens here aligns with his will. And that this is the thing that he's blessed, right? He stamped it with his approval and his authority, right? The exact same problem that they had when they built the Tower of Babel. They convinced themselves that what they were building was this great tower unto God, to honor
But
God.
now, I think the difference in that construct is that the person who was behind in the building of it never had any intent in worshiping the true God. I think the intent in that construct was to make sure that this judgment, because keep in mind that happened right after the flood.
Mm-hmm.
So now, and we're talking about Nimrod, correct? So
Yeah.
now he gets his people, he gets everybody on one accord to build this tower, and this will never happen to us again. But Nimrod wasn't a person who submitted himself to God. So,
I don't see a lack of parallels with the United States, right? It's a nation built in such a way that we wanted to prevent what happened in Britain from ever happening again. We now want to prevent. We now are casting out. We can't be socialists. And at the idea of saying we're not socialists, and I'm not saying we're socialists, we're also not helping people, right? We're allowing just the idea of shared resources to be labeled as socialist, so we don't even help people, right? We are building these things in an effort to not be something, but we're missing what God has actually called us to be. And I just wonder if we're engaging. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not as much of a theorist of the Bible as you are, so I conceive that. But I would say I just wonder. The Bible talks about many forms of idolatry, and I just wonder if American nationalism has become idolatry, and the church is more concerned about defending America than it is about defending God.
okay, that is a excellent segue into my final thought, and I wasn't even going to address it tonight. So you talked about you just brought up the thought of nationalism. I guess I could say nationalism versus socialism. So whether we know it or not, realize it or not, ever thought about it or not, the word of God does speak against socialism as it pertains to this country. But you have to understand where it's at and where to find it. Obviously, I cannot go into it now because in full detail. So this is going to be a drive-by, literally a drive-by. So you have to go. You would have to go to. You have to go to Revelations, the 13th chapter. Revelations 13th chapter, and when you read there, you'll find. And I think I explained. We had this conversation.
You did. You did.
Yeah, off camera last week. That whole construct, the governmental system behind that is socialism. When you examine it, when you examine it, and not only that, but it's one world government in Revelation chapter 13. I think in the next coming weeks we'll do a lesson on that again, because I think it has to be explained. And again, when I say a lot of my battling this year has been, or these 4 years, has been the perception that I am a Trump apologist. and actually it goes way beyond that, because um, I defend the fact that I see what's happening out. See, as long as we're arguing about racism and abortion and all these other things, our argument is down here. Okay, it's down here, and we know that God is his his ways are above our ways, and his thoughts are above our thoughts. And as far as the heaven is from the earth is from the heavens, so is his ways and his thoughts. So as long as we keeping our argument on what party is best suited to that, and as long as we're keeping our argument on racism and all of the other arguments that we constantly think about, we're still here. And until we look at it from God's purview up here, then we've missed the whole kid. So that's why I argue it, because I see the country, the way this country is going now, we're setting ourselves up for judgment. And unfortunately, we have to go to a poll to pick either one person, and depending on who it is that wins the election, it's going to be either the current government that we have, or a new government that we're going to institute with a whole bunch of other things that cause people to suffer. And I think that's solely where we keep the basis of our argument, and not really focusing on a higher thought, like, God, what are you saying? What are you thinking? How should I, in all our ways, acknowledge him and he'll direct our path? Are we really still letting God direct our path? I'm gonna let you have the last comment, because I can go on and on.
I'll just say a couple things. I would say that I would challenge anyone to analyze America and not find socialism. And I would say that we pick and choose where we choose to share our resources and who we choose to share them with. But socialism is just the sharing of resources for mutual benefit, even if it's voluntarily or if it's taken. And we know that we have systems within the United States where resources are taken from us for a mutual benefit, socialism, or where we voluntarily provide it. I don't think that the Bible speaks ill of using the social dynamic in order to benefit the majority. And so I don't find, and I've heard your interpretation of end times and of Revelations, and we can agree to disagree about some of that. But I would say this. I would say that I would argue that if people can't find a way to help, even if it's not through socialist means, right? Even if it's not through the sharing of resources, which I find to be strange because that's what we do in America. If that is your issue and you find a reason, and what you're looking for is a reason not to help, that in and of itself is antithetical to the gospel, right? I don't care if you're a socialist or not. I don't care what particular governmental bend you want to lean towards. If it results in you having the world's wealth and not sharing it, the Bible says that that's murder, that's hate. That's what it says in 1 John. However you get there, get there. But for people, I do find it hypocritical at times for people to rail against socialism. The last thing I would say is one of the big issues right now is the socialized healthcare plan. Anybody who is a part of a healthcare plan is a part of a socialized healthcare plan. You've just excluded certain people from it. But at the end of the day, you are pooling your resources with other insurance payers in order to pay for each other's insurance coverage. That is socialism. I just find, again, it's who we want to be a part of the system. It's not what we want to do within the system. But that's just my take on it.
Okay. All right. So with that, we're gonna go ahead and end and close, because we can
Could do this all day.
Yeah. We can do this all. Jason, man, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I want to thank Tisha for sharing you these past 2 weeks with us. And also I'm gonna be I'm trying to clear the schedule because I got to get to her. I got to get to
boss, you've heard nothing yet. I'm like John the Baptist out here, man. I just I tell about the great one to come.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So we'll see. All right. So listen. Oh yeah. Let me also add this. Back in August, you you did comment on it last week, but back in August, you did minister down in Mansfield.
Yeah.
And what I want to do is, as a bonus for our audio podcast platform, I wanted to take the audio from that and just add it as a bonus, to our platform here.
I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah, we should. But you can also, those of you who you don't want to wait to hear it on the audio format, you can go to YouTube, and I think it's MAC, MAC.
Yeah,
August.
Mansfield Alliance Church. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's either August 20th or August 30th of this year, 2020.
Yeah.
But we're titling that, I don't remember what your title is, but we're titling that racism, lessons from Ephesians 2.
I called it, who does my identity identify?
There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So make sure you text that to me so I can put the proper title in.
Absolutely.
So the program director is coming to me and she's flagging me down.
Oh,
she's about to come
please send my love to the program director too, please.
She said, shut it down now. Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Straight Truth Radio podcast. Again, we want to thank our honored guest, Jason Carter.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And remember, you can check us out on reach out to us if you have any questions or comments, straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. That's straighttruthradio@yahoo.com. Continue to watch our video platform and format on Facebook at Cliff Kelly and Straight Truth Radio.
You're listening to Clifford Kelly on Straight Truth Radio,
and
the podcast.
Also Twitter, Straight Truth, @Straight Truth R1, @Straight Truth R1, Periscope, and also YouTube. Again, we are on the audio format. It's Anchor, Podbean, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. Again, this is Straight Truth Radio Podcast. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week. God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.